Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Attention Please podcast, now on video. If you like this podcast, kindly like, subscribe, and share. You know what to do. So, today I'm going to be talking about Kangana Ranaut and Veer Das. And I realized at the moment I said this line, this sentence, I'm going to be talking about Kangana Ranaut and Veer Das, they have already won. Because that's exactly what they want us to do. So, for me, at least the way I look at it, it's less about the outrage and less about what they actually said and more about the strategy that guides celebrityhood in this day and age of polarized social media echo chambers. So, for those of you who have been living under a rock and have no idea what I mean, here's what's happened. So, Kangana Ranaut, I think in an interview with Navika Kumar of Times Now, said something I would say ridiculous, and it was supposed to be ridiculous, by the way. Is that India did not win independence, or they won independence in 1947, but it was independence won by begging, and the real independence of India came in 2014 when the Narendra Modi government came to power. Now, obviously, trying to have a intellectual discussion on this is such an outrageous pronouncement that trying to say, but that's not correct. Here's history, here's facts. This is not really that kind of an argument. And when you get into this kind of argument, that's precisely what Kangana Ranaut wants. He wants you to get into that argument. She wants this to be a talking point. And that's really what I find fascinating about people like Kangana Ranaut and Veer Das, is that they create these talking points. And I'm talking about it right now. So, absolutely she's successful. So, for those of you who've been following my podcast, I've always held a very high opinion of Kangana Ranaut as a public communicator. I've not been a huge fan of her acting abilities. I think she's a good actress, but I think her range is fairly limited. There's only one particular type of character which I think she does particularly well. And people calling her a great actress, and I think that's a little bit of an overhype and an overkill. And it usually happens when somebody becomes a political figure, which is what Kangana Ranaut definitely has become. There is the whole bhakti thing that starts. So it's not she's a good actor, but she's not great. I wouldn't call her great because, again, I would say that her range is limited. But over the years, Kangana Ranaut has been less of an actor and more of a public communicator and somebody who has created a brand for herself. So maybe that's the better word, the personal branding part of it. So initially, when she started on her personal branding, for many years, Kangana Ranaut hardly spoke. For those of us who have followed her career from the very beginning. And then she started speaking. Now, initially, and that was where, that's where the genius of Kangana Ranaut comes out, is that she was initially co-opted by the liberal crowd in India because, she started off talking about, patriarchy and, all those keywords that people like to hear. And then suddenly around sometime, so she got a lot of airplay. She was everywhere. And then suddenly she took this pivot to unapologetic right-wing politics, which was very unique because that's usually not the way Bollywood, and especially Bollywood actors at the height of their career roll. Normally, nobody in Bollywood who's essentially in the game. They're not usually very forthright with their politics, and it makes perfect sense. But again, we live in very different times where I think the old model of movies and stars is kind of changing, with people increasingly, and of course, COVID-19 has accelerated that trend, with people actually consuming content on their mobiles. So, you don't go into a dark hall and look up at somebody and, feel that sense of awe. So, people have to be more relatable. And even Amitabh Bachchan realized that with when his that awe-inspiring thing went away and he came to television, which is something which he had resisted for many years. But I'm getting sidetracked. So what I always liked about Kangana Ranaut was that she first made this splash as somebody with a lot of opinions. She was eloquent, spoke well, And she was very forthright and brutal, and people at that point of time, the liberals were loving it, because the liberals wanted like Clooney's, and we don't have the Clooney's, we need somebody who. And so here was Kangana Ranaut, and then suddenly she took a turn to the right, and our liberal people suddenly started circulating memes of her or videos of her, riding a horse, on a green screen, as if in Marvel and all of this, actually Thanos flies, or any of this actually happens, and look at her. So this was again, the things with liberals is that once you're no longer in their tent, you're their enemy. And it's just not true for liberals, it's true for the Indian right wing too. But of course, since the Indian liberals have a stranglehold on media, it kind of feels that it's much more. So what Kangana did was she created a unique brand of her own, and she basically monopoly of the right-wing nationalist Bollywood mainstream actor. We've never seen somebody like this. And over the years, I would say that she has kind of ratcheted up the rhetoric, and it's important, because this kind of meat to the base, and I use the word meat, I should have used some non-vegetarian term here, but this kind of raw cauliflower to the base is essentially that it is to rile up the base and to rile up the opposition so that they fight and you come into the news. And that's really what it's all about. Branding means being in the news. And so it's not particularly interesting, at least to me, to deliberate on the content of what she said. She deliberately said this. Again, it makes no sense, I would say, but it's definitely controversial. Perhaps it's standard fare on WhatsApp, but in mainstream, it's not something which I've at least heard. So, with that respect, she's definitely moved the Overton window here. So, but to me, again, this was outrageous. I don't forget. I mean, even again, debating this or even trying to say, but wait, it's a waste of time. What she said, it's absolutely wrong. It's absolutely false. It's ahistoric. But really, who cares? I think Trump and the Republican right, and in ways the Indian right wing and left wing have shown that we live in a world where it's all about creating the noise. It's about throwing the stone into the water and just watching the ripples. That's really what the game is about. It's not so much about the content of what people say. Now, if you technically ask me, I think that Kangana has gone a bit too far with this. And maybe I'm saying this because my grandfather was a freedom fighter. So when she's saying, and he lived and he spent significant years of his youth in cellular jail in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So when she's saying things like, we won freedom by begging, that's first of all ahistoric, and I think it's deeply disrespectful for many freedom fighters. But again, it's trying to outrage over that is the second phase of exactly what Kangana Ranaut wants, and I'm not going to go to that stage. I've already talked about 8 minutes about her, so there it is. I'm perhaps going to now move on to Veer Das. So for Veer Das, what I said about Kangana is that Kangana is a decent, good actor. In my opinion, Veer Das is a bad stand-up comedian. I've never found him even remotely funny. Yeah, that's a personal opinion, and I've seen some of his work in Badmash Company and Masti Zade, and I've always wondered about the hypocrisy of somebody who, again, it's not a question of what kind of movies he's done. I mean, I'm a guy who loves Gunda, and I've no problem with whatever people do. People are free to do whatever they want, but then to do a certain kind of things, and then for money, obviously, and then to come and basically shit on that. In order to do virtue signaling, this is really the crux of what Veer Das is. So he would make perhaps, Masti Zade, which was the more, I don't use the word misogyny and homophobic lightly, but if there is any, if there's like 2 hours of misogyny and homophobia, it's Masti Zade. And he was part of it. He took money to be part of it. And for that guy to then come out and do a routine where he says, look at how terrible India is, and how we disrespect women. That to me is the start of the hypocrisy here. So unlike Kangana, I won't call him good at what he originally does, but the technique is very similar. in this case, what he did was, he's here in DC. I think he was in DC, where he did a stand-up routine, and then he uploaded perhaps the most controversial part on YouTube and shared it, from what I know. Because it wasn't enough for him to just say it there. The splash had to be made. So again, this is part of a very carefully calibrated PR strategy. Those of you people who think that the outrage, I mean, was he expecting to be sued? Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's where I think that things, people do exactly what people want them to do. So, right now in the US, there is a huge demand for diversity in comedy. And with Hassan Minhaj kind of falling out of grace with some of the controversies about his show, there's a gap. And Veer Das, he looks good. Of course, he's erudite, and anybody who does stand-up comedy for a living has to be. So he's eyeing that slot. But the thing about diversity is that diversity is only in terms of race and gender. It's never really in terms of opinions. Nobody in the US, even the liberal crowd, don't want somebody to tell them something that they're not comfortable with. So what Veer Das is currently doing is he's doing two things. One is that his kind of humor appeals to stereotypes about India. This thing about we worship women, and that entire thing is I've seen that, I've heard that, I've seen it in WhatsApp. So there's nothing innovative about that. But what he's doing is first of all, he's talking to an essentially foreign audience, in a foreign liberal audience who's there, other than the Indians, foreign liberal audience who's there to, encourage a diverse comic, which is good. But then he's not going to say something which is undiverse in terms of their opinions. He's not going to say something which is positive, really very positive about India. He can't. Because this is the subtle form of liberal racism in the US. I've been here for close to 20 years now, so I've seen this myself. Is that there is, and I've talked about this in my podcast before, maybe I'll talk about it again, but there is the racism of the Trump crowd, which is, send them back to their smelly country kind of racism, which I've encountered in the streets here. And then there's the more subtle racism, which is like kind of manifested in New York Times when India sent their Mars mission. They created that cartoon where there was a beggar asking for food. And somebody saying we've spent so that's that kind of racism, that Indians are not really worth what they have achieved, but they can't say it. The liberal crowd can't say it, so they really like it when somebody of that persuasion, somebody of an Indian says that, then they can laugh because now there is no guilt. So he's saying something which they want to say, they can't say it. He's saying it, so they can laugh. Everybody is good, and on top of that, he shows himself to be a quote unquote a liberal, which allows, and this is not just him, which allows them entry into the world of streaming, Netflix. I mean, they're all political, right? So this is what his crowd is. Again, this is where he wants to go. Again, coming back to Kangana is not looking to the Netflix thing. She's not going to make it through Netflix, given the political stance that she's adopted. I'm going to go with her end game is to go into politics. So that's really what she wants to do. She wants to adhere herself, and she's not being subtle about it. She's adhering herself to not only a political ideology, but to certain politicians in terms of supporting Modi. So again, if there is a power change in BJP, which I don't think will happen, and a different set of people come in, she's not banking on that. She's banking on the popularity of the current dispensation, and I think that's really what her long game is, and that's perfectly fine. With Veer, it's something different. He's not, people say Congressy and stuff. No, he's not. Which ambitious, smart person would want to audition to be somebody in the Congress? I mean, that's Kanaya maybe, but okay. I say smart, okay. But what he's doing in this case is, first of all, he's auditioning for multiple Netflix specials and Amazon Prime specials by doing this kind of, self-flagellation. That's one thing. Second thing is, he's actually trying to get himself, and this is important for people to understand, he's trying to get himself, quote unquote, banned. This is the ultimate label that he wants to affix onto himself. Banned by the fascist government of India. And by rising to that bait, by initiating legal proceedings against him, you're doing exactly what he wants you to do. Now the next phase happens. Now his mildly amusing, moderately attended event in DC now makes it to the papers. Now New York Times gets it, Washington Post gets it, and we have people in India who are willing to write whatever they want, whatever Washington Post wants them to write for the $300 or $200 that they get. So there is a workflow that has now been triggered thanks to whoever decided to sue him. The best thing would have been, of course, there was going to be social media outrage, but the best thing would have been to just ignore him, because he knows that he's not going to get ignored. And that's why, if you kind of dilly-dally, then you might get ignored, right? If you're a centrist like me, you'll get ignored. But if you say something which is absolutely outrageous, then you're not going to get ignored. You're going to get people who are going to scurry to your defense, and you're going to get people who are going to be absolutely outraged and determined to cancel you. And this is exactly what he wants. So now what he's done is this outrage is going to help him. It's going to help him in his tour. It's going to help him to get that label that he is so risque that, the Indian government wants him banned. That's how it's going to play out, right? And nobody's going to say that it's not the Indian government, it's some private citizen who sued him. It's all fine. It's, I said something against the government, so I got sued, ergo it's the government which did it. So this is the start. And I've said this, this government, this was this government and their associated, media lackeys like, Times Now at that point of time, they made the career of Kanhaiya Kumar. Kanhaiya Kumar, if they hadn't done what they did, would have just been yet another JNU overaged PhD who was once a union leader, which every year there is one. So the reason why Kanhaiya Kumar is at least a name that we still know years after he's passed out from JNU is precisely this, because the government decided to take him seriously. And many people will say, but you have to draw the line. No, this is not the line. And especially when we are a democracy, we have to understand that there will be people, and people are free to have their agendas. But if you want to oppose somebody's agenda, then the least you can do is help him by doing so. See, liberals don't do that. Liberals, if they don't like someone, they go for the exact right thing. They don't sue the guy. They deplatform them. And they can do it because they own the platform. So they just ensure that that person is not heard. They don't create the conditions such that the person's voice is amplified. And that's unfortunately is what the right wing does here. It does things which amplifies that voice, which otherwise would have kind of died in the dark. Now it is going to persist. So I see this and I say, oh God, these guys have stepped into it once again. Of course he said this. What else is he going to say? Just ignore, move on. We have so many people say so many things. Just listen to it. If you need to outrage, but move on. Don't go to the courts. So again, this is what I find fascinating about these things. And the only reason why I spoke of it was, again, and I know that, by speaking of it, I've served their purpose. I know that. But I find this fascinating. I find this fascinating as somebody who likes communication, as somebody who loves to observe the way that personal brands are created. And I think whether this is good or bad, there's no good or bad. I mean, there's no moral judgment here. I mean, the only thing is the brand created or is the brand not created? And I think that they have done a great job. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. And I will hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.